I grew up in the church, and I've been a committed Christian since I was a teenager. Not only that, but I served as a church planter and a pastor for 24 years. But in spite of all that, I have a confession to make. Sometimes when I hear people speak about God, I feel like an atheist. The God they speak of, I just don't believe in. A God who loves Christians but hates Muslims, or a God who pours luxuries on the rich but consigns the poor to poverty, or a God who cares about human souls but doesn't give a rip about conserving and protecting our beautiful, fragile planet. So if you ask me, is God real? I first have to ask which God we're talking about and what do you mean by God? Do you mean an old man with a long white beard who's making a list and checking it twice, or a chess master moving pieces around on a divine chessboard, or a cosmic clockmaker who set the world in motion but now keeps his distance, or maybe a vague fog that descends on certain people? When we ask if God is real, we also have to ask what we mean by real. Is God real the same way a physical object like a frying pan or a toaster or a cinder block is real? Or is God real the way love or freedom or hope is real? Or maybe God is real in a way we can't actually conceptualize but can only imagine. Now, I think that word imagine is central to speaking about God because whenever we speak of God, we compare God to things we know, and those things become images for God. So we might use physical or functional images for God, imaging God as a rock or a shield or a fortress, or we might use personal and relational images for God, like a mother, father, friend, or king. Or we might use mysterious images of power and wonder for God, like water or fire or wind or light. We have no way to speak or even think about God apart from images like these. In fact, the idea of the Trinity, so central to traditional Christian understandings of God, takes a great deal of imagination. Through history, people have used images like three dancers moving in a circle, or three leaves of a clover, or three states of water to try to convey that one God can exist in three persons, or that three persons can constitute one God. But our use of images for God puts us in a constant struggle because if we aren't careful, we over-identify God with the image itself. So, for example, we might speak of God as king, but do we actually mean God is a literal king sitting on a literal throne upon his own literal gluteus maximus? Or if we speak of Jesus sitting at God's right hand, do we think God has two literal hands, left and right? If we speak of God's voice, do we think God has literal vocal cords that vibrate with literal breath expelled from literal lungs that breathe literal oxygen? I mean, when you begin to face these complexities, you realize why Christian thinkers and mystics have created two technical terms to describe two ways of thinking and speaking about God. In the cataphatic tradition, we emphasize that our images and words really can help us to conceive of God and relate to God. It means that we can talk about God. But in the apophatic tradition, we remind ourselves that God can never be reduced to images or contained by words. It means that reverent, loving silence is sometimes the most eloquent form of theology. When we hold these two traditions in proper balance, we keep seeking God, reaching out to God, and relating to God, always remembering that God can never be fully grasped in hand or captured in a box or stuffed into the hip pocket of our tiny little minds. Some people overestimate how much their language can capture and contain God. They lose the needed balance in the direction of excessive certainty, and their faith resembles a fortress built on a mountain. Whether they're believers or atheists, these folks are equally certain of their own viewpoint, equally dismissive of everybody else's, and equally impervious to learning something new. Life for them becomes a war zone, and faith for them is reduced to a fight about who's more right. Other people make the opposite mistake. Their faith resembles an imaginary castle floating up in the clouds. Everything's highly speculative and theoretical and academic and very far removed from real life and daily experience. If fortress people reduce God to concrete facts, cloud people reduce God to foggy opinions. If fortress people turn faith into a vicious fight about who's more right, cloud people reduce faith to a kind of inconsequential leisure activity, like doing crossword puzzles or collecting refrigerator magnets or being wine connoisseurs. In between these extremes, the rest of us need a third alternative. We don't want faith to be a fight, and we don't want faith to be a fog. We want our faith to be a quest for God and with God. For those of us who live in the zone of wonder and curiosity, faith and doubt, desperation and hope, maybe we could say that for us, faith is like a ship that we're sailing on. Our beliefs are like planks in the hull, and the trials and disappointments and enigmas of life are like the storms and icebergs and reefs that sometimes threaten to sink us. Sometimes old planks spring a leak and have to be replaced, often when we're far from shore. We might say that God is the source and the goal of our quest, and that God is the mysterious sea upon which we sail, and that God is the wind we raise our sails to receive. We might say that fellowship is what we experience with fellow travelers on our ship of faith. We might even say that theology is the necessary maintenance of the hull and decks and sails so that our ship stays seaworthy for generations to come. In all of this, of course, we need to remember that maintenance of the ship is not the point. The quest is our experience of and with God. The great French philosopher Blaise Pascal said it simply and well. We are embarked. In other words, we aren't just theorizing about a hypothetical journey or planning a potential voyage for someday in the future. We're already at sea, actually underway in the wild adventure of sun and wind and wave and tide. I can't help but think of the way Jesus made sure to lead his disciples off of dry land and out into the deep, as if to say, pay attention, friends, this is what the life of faith is like. Sometimes on my journey, I've experienced God in extraordinary ways, in dramatic surprises or soul-expanding insights or unexplainable mystical encounters. But more often, I felt God's reality in the simple encouragement of a friend, in the gentle inspiration of a sermon, or in the familiar ritual of the Eucharist. And I'd be less than honest if I didn't also say that at times I found myself in the spiritual doldrums, cast adrift and wondering if the wind would ever blow again. But through it all, I find myself between unfathomable depths above me and unfathomable depths below me, captured by the call of the sea and the thrill of adventure, which are for me beautiful images for God, whose grandeur and wonder surpass all words. So I wonder, do you find yourself more compelled by the Capophatic tradition that we can speak confidently of God? If so, what are the images that work best for you and that mean the most for you? Or maybe you are more compelled by the apophatic tradition that at the end of the day, human language always fails and silent, reverent wonder is our best theology. How do you try to reach that healthy balance where you use images that help you explore and search for God, but never become overdependent on them? How are you embarked on a journey of seeking for God and keeping the quest alive?